Thomas Bennett was a good man who lost everything in one terrible night. His wife vanished without a trace. The police found blood. The neighbors whispered. And Thomas went to prison for a murder he didn't commit. But 3 years later, a scream from the house next door changed everything. Because his wife wasn't dead. She was alive. And she'd been 10 feet away the whole time. The day they found Linda Bennett, Thomas had already served 1,087 days in prison for killing her. He'd memorized that number. Every morning he scratched another line into the concrete wall of his cell. Every night he stared at the wedding photo they'd let him keep. The only proof that she'd ever been real, ever been his, ever existed outside the nightmare his life had become. The police said he'd murdered her. The jury said the evidence was overwhelming. His own lawyer said to take the plea deal. But Thomas Bennett knew 3 things for certain. He loved his wife, he would never hurt her, and somewhere out there, Linda was still alive. He just couldn't prove it. Not until the day Caroline Murphy heard the crying. Thomas Bennett wasn't the kind of man who stood out in a crowd. He was 42 years old with graying hair and kind eyes. He worked as a high school history teacher. He drove a 12-year-old sedan. He mowed his lawn every Sunday and waved to his neighbors, and never forgot to put the garbage bins out on Thursday mornings. He was ordinary in every way, except one. He loved his wife like she was the only woman on earth. Linda Bennett was 40 years old, with honey-colored hair and a laugh that made strangers smile. She worked as a nurse at the children's hospital downtown. She baked cookies for the neighborhood kids every Christmas. She left little notes in Thomas's lunch bag with hearts drawn in the margins. They'd been married for 18 years. They'd never spent a night apart. Not until March 7th. That was the night everything ended. Thomas came home from a parent-teacher conference at 9:47 p.m. He remembered the exact time because he'd checked his watch in the driveway, thinking he'd made good time, and maybe they could watch a movie together before bed. The front door was unlocked. That was the first strange thing. Linda always locked the door. Always. She'd grown up in a bad neighborhood, and some habits never left you. "Lynn?" Thomas called out, stepping inside. The living room was dark. The TV was off. Her purse sat on the kitchen counter next to her car keys. "Linda, you home?" Nothing. He walked through the house, room by room. Their bedroom was empty. The bathroom door stood open. Her slippers sat beside the bed where she always left them. But Linda was gone. Thomas told himself not to panic. Maybe she'd walked to the neighbor's house. Maybe she'd gotten a call from the hospital and caught a ride with a coworker. He called her cell phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. By midnight, Thomas had called everyone they knew. Her sister, her best friend, the hospital. No one had seen Linda since she'd left work at 6:30 p.m. At 1:15 a.m., Thomas called the police. At 2:43 a.m., 2 officers arrived at his door. At 2:20 a.m., they found the blood. The blood was in the garage. Not a lot of it, just a smear on the concrete floor near the recycling bins, and a few drops on the handle of a shovel. "Mr. Bennett," the older officer said. His name was Garrett. He had gray hair and tired eyes. "When's the last time you were in the garage?" "This morning," Thomas said. His voice sounded hollow, distant. "I got a rake for the leaves." "You used that shovel recently?" "No. Maybe last week. I was planting bulbs in the back garden." Officer Garrett crouched down near the blood. He didn't touch it, just looked. "Mr. Bennett, I need you to be honest with me. Did you and your wife have any arguments recently? Any problems?" "No, we were fine. We're always fine." The officer stood up slowly. He exchanged a glance with his partner. "Sir, we're going to need you to come down to the station, just to answer some questions." Thomas went willingly. He thought he was helping. He thought if he just explained everything clearly, they'd understand. They'd go find Linda. He didn't realize he was the only suspect. In the interrogation room, they asked him the same questions over and over. Where were you tonight? Parent-teacher conference. Anyone see you there? Yes, dozens of parents, other teachers. What time did you leave? Around 9:30. Long drive home? 20 minutes. But the conference ended at 8:30, Mr. Bennett. Where were you for that extra hour? Thomas blinked. I stayed late. Talked to a few parents individually. Can anyone confirm that? I think so. Maybe. I don't remember exactly. Did you and Linda fight? No. Money problems? No. Affairs? No, never. Neither of us. The questions went on for 6 hours. They released him at dawn with a warning not to leave town. Thomas drove home in a fog. The house felt enormous and empty. Linda's coffee mug still sat in the sink from yesterday morning. Her reading glasses.
Settling foundations, creaky floors. But this was different. This sounded like crying. Soft, distant, like someone weeping in another room. Caroline walked through her house trying to pinpoint it. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. She checked the basement. Nothing. She checked the attic. Nothing. The crying stopped around midnight. She convinced herself she'd imagined it, but the next night she heard it again. This time she stood perfectly still in her kitchen and listened. The sound was coming from the wall she shared with Roger's house. Caroline didn't want to be that neighbor, the nosy one who made accusations. So she waited. For 3 weeks, she heard the crying every night, sometimes soft, sometimes desperate. And then one night, she heard words. Please. It was so faint she almost missed it. Please. Help me. Caroline's blood went cold. She grabbed her phone and walked outside. Roger's house was dark, except for a single light in the kitchen window. She thought about knocking on his door. She thought about calling the police. But what would she say? I hear crying through the walls? They'd think she was crazy. Second lock, bolted. Third lock, bolted. And then she heard it again. Crying, coming from below. Hello? Caroline said louder. Is someone down there? The crying stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then a voice, weak, trembling. Help me, please. He's going to kill me. Caroline's hands flew to her phone. She dialed 911. There is someone locked in a basement, she said when the operator answered. I think someone's being held captive. She gave Roger's address. The operator told her to leave the house immediately and wait outside. But Caroline couldn't move. Who are you? She called through the door. What's your name? A long pause. Then the voice said something that made the entire world tilt sideways. Linda. My name is Linda Bennett. The police arrived in 4 minutes. They broke down Roger's basement door with a battering ram. Caroline stood on the lawn with her arms wrapped around herself, watching officers pour into the house. She heard shouting, movement, radio chatter. And then a paramedic emerged carrying a woman. She was thin, terribly thin. Her hair was matted and dirty. She wore a stained nightgown. But her eyes were open. She was alive. Caroline started crying without knowing why. The paramedics loaded the woman into an ambulance. Police swarmed Roger's property. Crime scene tape went up. An officer approached Caroline. Ma'am, I need to ask you some questions. Caroline nodded numbly. How did you know someone was down there? I heard crying every night for weeks. The officer wrote that down. Did you know the homeowner, Roger Petty? No, I had just moved in. He seemed normal. And you're sure you heard a voice? Yes, she said her name was Linda Bennett. The officer's pen stopped moving. He looked up sharply. What did you say? Linda Bennett. That's what she told me. The officer's face went pale. He stepped away and spoke urgently into his radio. Caroline didn't understand, but something big was happening. Something that reached far beyond this quiet street. Across town, in a medium-security prison, a guard approached Thomas Bennett in the cafeteria. Bennett, warden wants to see you. Thomas stood up slowly. Visits to the warden were never good. He followed the guard down the long hallway, through 3 locked doors, into an office with fluorescent lights and a desk covered in paperwork. The warden sat behind his desk. He looked shaken. Mr. Bennett? Sit down. Thomas sat. I don't know how to tell you this, so I'm just going to say it straight. Thomas's heart started pounding. They found your wife this morning. She's alive. The room disappeared. Thomas couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. She was being held captive in your neighbor's basement. Roger Petty. He's been arrested. And you? The warden's voice cracked. You're being released immediately. All charges dropped. Thomas stared at him. My wife is alive? Yes. Linda's alive? Yes, sir. Thomas put his face in his hands and sobbed. They took Thomas to the hospital in a police car. He didn't remember the drive, didn't remember walking through the automatic doors or taking the elevator to the 4th floor. All he could think was, she's alive. Linda's alive. A doctor met him outside her room. Mr. Bennett, I need to prepare you. Your wife has been through severe trauma. She's malnourished, dehydrated. She has some injuries we're still treating. Can I see her? Yes, but please understand, she may not be the same person you remember. What she's been through, it changes people. Thomas nodded. He didn't care. He just needed to see her. The doctor opened the door. Linda sat propped up in the hospital bed. She'd been cleaned up. Her hair was brushed. She wore a hospital gown. But she looked so small. When she saw Thomas, her face crumpled. Tom? She whispered. He crossed the room in 3 steps and fell to his knees beside her bed. Lynn! Oh God, Lynn! She reached for him with trembling hands, and he took them gently. They were so thin, like bird bones. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for. They said you went to prison. They said everyone thought you killed me. I don't care. None of that matters. You're here. You're alive. She squeezed his hands. I called for you every day. I screamed your name, and you were right there.
About a new coffee shop opening downtown. Normal things. Beautiful. Ordinary. Normal things. And for the first time in 5 years, Thomas Bennett felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Because they'd been through the worst thing imaginable. They'd lost everything, but they'd found their way back to each other. And that was enough. That was everything. Sometimes the worst nightmares end. Sometimes justice finds its way. And sometimes, against all odds, love prevails. The journey of Thomas and Linda Bennett and the unbelievable endurance of Caroline Murphy teaches us a critical lesson, that real horror rarely announces itself with a warning. Thomas was wronged by the entire system, convicted by planted evidence and the false testimony of the very man who held his wife captive. He learned the agonizing truth that the person who seems the most harmless, the quiet neighbor, Roger Petty, the retired postal worker, can harbor the darkest secrets. For Thomas, the cost was 1,087 days of his life.
For Linda, it was 3 years of silence and terror, all of it happening just 10 feet away. This story should serve as a wake-up call to all of us. We live in worlds where we